We'll call this meeting to order, the first meeting in the year of 2013. And life continues. Anyway, first of all, we're going to start out with City Council open discussion. Is there anything anybody would like to address? Councilman Jameson, please. Sorry about that, Greg. I'm moving a little fast here.
It's all right. It's a new year, new beginning. I suppose, and in that vein, I've actually got several items I'd like to cover, but first I want to bring up is the discussion regarding the council rules and, in essence, how we manage public input. The 20-minute rule that we had instigated in this last discussion of snow gates. I asked for some help and received it in some research, finding out that certainly we have instituted that rule in the past in multiple occasions, going back to as far as 2009. And that seemed to be a new information to some of us, but there had been topics that we had used the 20-minute rule and others that we did not. And I think it seems fair that we probably address it in some way so that we don't arbitrarily choose which topics to limit public discussion about. And being that it is 2013, that maybe we start a new fresh start with some rules about what we should do and how we should do it. And I don't have the answers. I'm just saying we should discuss this and figure it out so that when the next item comes forward, we don't choose to arbitrarily set a limit on the time. I'm not in favor of limiting public discussion at all, and I don't think really it should be limited, but we do need to have some orders in place to manage our discussions and our business. I don't know the answers yet, but I think it needs to be consistent so that we don't pick winners and losers on which topics we discuss to some great length within hours and others that we limit. So I'd like us to somehow consider an effort that's just a little more consistent and predictable so the public knows what to expect and essentially knows what the rules are. That would be on the council, the 7 o'clock meetings. The other one is the informational meetings. You know, there's discussion about these 2-question limits, you know, and somebody asking more questions than maybe is acceptable. We really all should know and understand what the rules are. And even if we just lay them out at the beginning maybe of each year, or maybe they're laid out already and we just need to have them explained to us in better detail as new counselors come back, as older counselors forget, somehow or another we have these in a place that we all look at and say, well, here are the rules. Here's how we engage each other during this meeting. Here's how the public is supposed to be engaged. Are they allowed to come and speak to us at this forum? It's generally not been the case. Are we allowed to have exceptions? Could we make exceptions? This is our own meeting. I'm sure we probably could do that. But I think it'd be helpful for all of us to have the same rules laid out in front of us so we know what they are and answer all those questions and then move forward together on the same page. Does that seem reasonable?
Sure. That's
just, you know, I see some nodding, but if you've got other things to add, those were just a couple of the meetings that I think need, you know, some clarification. I'm sure we could go on about who decides what goes to what committee, what comes here, the agenda process. Maybe it's just a tune-up. Maybe we all just need a tune-up. I don't know. But I just thought starting with 2013 would be a fair time to start the discussions or get a plan in place.
Good. Anybody else? Any input on Greg's suggestions on this particular item? One question I might have, Councilor Jameson, is when you look at the regular council meetings and the policy that has been set of the 20 minutes, the comments have always been on the part of the administration, we'd like people, you know, we understand, especially there's a lot of issues that become extremely a lot of discussion on it, very, not necessarily personal, but a lot of people have some great input on it. And a lot of the comments would be a lot of the same. And I know the mayor has always asked that we look at that and we try to bring forward new information. You know, we understand the public input. A lot of us have had that ahead of time. Would you suggest then that we look at the timelines that are involved, possibly follow the same kind of thing? Or my other question to you is, what about if we have some good discussion about this at a working session too, where we have a chance to talk at it as counselors here, maybe in a working session we might have coming up?
The Operations Committee has taken a look at the notebook that we receive as council members, and then also the one that the administration, HR, has put together, and we're trying to put together the best information, and we are almost ready to present some of that to the council, and I think that a working session would be the appropriate place. As far as some of the agenda rules, I know that some of that is specified in ordinance as far as responsibilities of leadership, but we also probably need to take a look at additional items and spell them out. So I think that this would be a great topic, again, for a working session, and so that the council, we are at the point that we should be ready within the next month to present the information that we have compiled, because that will have to come before and be agreed upon by the council. And any changes are welcome.
Councilor Ruffin?
Yeah, I would agree with Councilor Aguilar. We've not looked at that, but that is probably something that needs to go in there. And I would thank you for doing the research on the 20-minute deal, number one, and number two. Remind you that the two-question type situation is more to make sure that other counselors get their questions in also. We never limit the number of questions that a counselor can ask, only the number in repetition. So we always come back to the counselor so that they can get the number of questions in to, get the information that they need.
So if everybody, if there's kind of a consensus on that, I'll pass this on to the chairman, to the chair.
Yep.
And suggest to her that we try to schedule a working session for sometime in the next, we'll find out how the committee's doing sometime in the next 60 days probably. February, first part of March. Greg, does that sound okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's all I was looking for, was just putting everybody on the same page. And
Good points. Good points. Also, I think you had something else, Greg, you wanted to bring up too during open discussion. I see Mark did come in.
Good, yes. I wanted to bring up the MOU that we received. Has everybody had a chance to read it? The MOU for the railroad relocation project.
I just received mine today, and I think a number of us just received them today too, so we haven't had a chance to review it yet.
I've had a chance to review it, and of course it's been kind of a hot topic for me anyway, but I didn't know that this was the time to review some of those items, so I just wanted to bring up a few concerns that I had, but I don't want to put it out in a public forum either unless it's meant to be discussed. And I'm
Councilor James, would it be possible, I know you had some questions, but a lot of us haven't had a chance to review it yet, so we're really not familiar with it yet. Do you think it's appropriate to go forward with it now, or should we bring it forward at the next informational next week, Greg?
I would say whatever works for the group. I'm okay to wait too, but if I'll yield the floor.
In the email we received, it was asked that all comments be made by January 4th. And so I think that, this would probably be, unless that is a confidential document.
Mark?
Hello, Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Due to its nature, a non-binding agreement, if there are questions that we can answer today, that would be, we're certainly here to do that. And if a couple additional days are required, we can certainly adjust the schedule. We're just trying to keep the project on track.
Well, if I could, Mark, you obviously didn't schedule a public informational meeting to discuss this.
Right.
So you can tell I'm dancing here on whether I should talk about it or not, because I don't want to expose or create a problem for anybody.
Sure.
So,
We can.
Questions are okay, Mark, right now,
I'm-
if Counselor Jameson has?
I'm fine with questions.
Okay, great.
That's right.
all right, very good. Then the first one is, I think fair enough, is that are you ready to sign this, and is the mayor ready as it is?
Yes, we're comfortable with the document. And we've had extensive review with Federal Highway, Department of Transportation, our consultant, and Burlington Northern. And again, the overlying discussion of this is it is a non-binding document, but if the straight sale of the downtown yard ultimately becomes the preferred option, then this would be the guidance steps that would be carried through. The true binding document, which would be the purchase and sale agreement, if that ultimately comes forward, will come before this body for full consideration and review.
Okay, if I could, I'll try to do this as fast as I can. Mark, do you have the agreement in front of you?
I do.
If we could go to, essentially, this starts with Section 43, the PSA, the Purchase Sales Agreement. My only thought was here to add at the very end on line 49, it says will be identified and addressed in the appraisal period. You know, I don't want to read it all, but the idea is that we would add the words and deducted from the purchase price paid for the property. So not only will it be addressed in the appraisal, but it will be deducted in the purchase price for the property. Does that make sense? It just is a little clearer.
It does. You know, one of the things that we did on the description and also the purchase section is that we intentionally, you know, wanted to make sure that when we actually hire the expert appraiser, and they have the discussions, they read through the soil boring logs, there may or may not be an offset needed, just based on, first and foremost, today it operates as a railroad. And the value to Burlington Northern is that it operates today as a rail yard. There's a value to that for their operating needs. And so then the environmental piece may be separate. And so we wrote it in that fashion to still allow us to have a discussion with the expert appraiser whether there's a need for an offset in the purchase price or not. And so I certainly understand the question and the comment, and we intentionally left that open until we actually hire that expert to help us with that step. Because to us, I know a future developer, that will be a cost. But there's a cost throughout the entire downtown, just based on its history, of some level of cleanup. There may not be an offset seen in the eyes of Burlington Northern, because today it operates as a yard. We've asked them for the ability to purchase that yard, and that again is why we wrote it in that fashion.
All right, very good. I mean, it's meant to raise awareness to the issue of the environmental remediation that needs to be done.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Clearly, you guys will figure it out. Okay, the other one is the fence. That starts at line 62. Are we sure that we want to be the ones to maintain and put up a fence and all that?
You know, as we've just talked with the growing needs of and people downtown, we thought that a fence that wouldn't be solid, but something, and I can picture a 6 to 8 foot more ornamental iron fence that you can still look through and see the historical nature of the depot and the moving trains downtown. But we thought from a safety standpoint that that should be an important part, that as we develop, we started those discussions, that component of the fence is not federally eligible. And so it's one of those costs, in addition to the environmental faults, that wouldn't be federally eligible, but we also think it's the right thing to do, just with the separation of office and urban needs and an industry. And so I think, I guess some of that is, again, it's non-binding in nature, but we thought it's probably smart growth to separate that industry and the downtown development.
Okay, it's not a big deal, but
Okay. Okay.
Then to item, or line number 87.
Okay.
Guess it's that time, huh? This starts with the essentially the purchase price or the purchase agreement. And what I was concerned about when I read this was essentially equal rights. That there is, the Burlington Northern has a way out of this MOU if the price isn't agreeable to them. They can terminate the agreement, but the only way, if I understand it, that the city can terminate the MOU is if the price is over and above the federal earmark. And it's just my thought that there shouldn't be any mention of the federal earmark in this agreement. I mean, it's either the price is a good price or it's a fair price or it's not. Whether it exceeds the federal earmarks is somewhat irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. It's still our money. And so the thought was just to, in the end, the essence of it is that essentially at the end of line 89, after the BNSF reserves the right to terminate this MOU, likewise, the city is able to terminate the agreement if the amount is unreasonable. I don't have this written right exactly, but so in essence the same rights. So the city can terminate this MOU if the offer or the price from Burlington Northern is not agreeable, and disregard any mention of the federal earmark funds. In essence, all it's doing is giving us the same rights as Burlington Northern. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and maybe just to put some context, the reason we both took an out in that area is that as a project team, and we know it's important to the city council as well, that we do everything in our power to work within the federal earmark. And so we started off with more direct language and then mutually agreed to have two takeaways like this, but essentially the project team is working in good faith to try to get this transaction done. Again, if the straight sale becomes the preferred option through the environmental assessment process, that will do everything in our power to work within the limits of the earmark. And that's essentially what the two takeaways were for.
All right, well, just as a general principle, it just seems odd that we would limit ourselves to only the federal earmarks funds as the amount that it's not acceptable by us with by all accounts. I can't imagine that $35 million is acceptable for 9.5 acres myself. But,
okay.
All right, just so it's duly noted that I objected to that.
Okay.
Okay, and one last one. You talk a lot about the two pieces left. I'm sorry. The non-binding nature of it is that if you read down to line 136, it says the binding commitments with respect to the project will result only from the execution of the PSA. However, the parties agree to negotiate in good faith using commercially reasonable efforts to reach agreement on the PSA for the project consistent with the terms and conditions set forth above. So in essence, after we accept these, we now have the rules for how we will negotiate the PSA. They're not termed as binding until we agree to this MOU, and then they become the terms by which we negotiate the PSA. So I know you say they're not binding, but it seems and sounds that they become binding.
Right, the PSA effectively becomes the binding document.
Absolutely, but the terms of which the PSA is negotiated are set out in the
That's
MOU.
correct. That's correct.
So they become binding in another way, is the.
And I think our other key component to putting this section 3 in was really focuses on the next page that if there's project costs and expenses incurred by BNSF or the city, that they will be borne exclusively by each of those agencies and not, for example, if BNSF invests dollars researching this, they can't bill the city. And so that becomes a key binding component of this document, just to make sure that that's clear. We're both going to negotiate in good faith. We're working within the federal guidelines, and and funding requirements. They're obviously making an investment, hiring their own experts to look out on behalf of themselves. But if there are project costs and expenses that they're borne by each individual in themselves, and that's truly the piece of the binding obligations that we took away.
Okay, the last one real quick is under terms. It really starts with item or line 142, but in essence, all I'm after is adding another bullet point to the other three ways in which the contract can be terminated, and that was to include that either party will not accept the other's offer. The only other ways out of it are we don't agree to I guess both parties agree to in writing to terminate this MOU, but I still think we should add another line that says either party will not accept the other's offer. That was really it.
Okay, let me take a look at those. And
we could talk further about it. I only brought it up because I think this body together does a great job of collaborating and feeding off of other comments and suggestions, and I hope that happens here.
Sure. And just let me also go back to the project team and materially, if there are things that we believe that those comments and concerns are addressed, then I'll respond back. And but if there's betterments that can be added, we'll work to that. Okay.
Rex? Councilor Jameson, good?
I'm all done.
Rex?
Excuse me. Yes, Mark, I read this thing fairly carefully, and the thing that could be thrown in there is there's always a third party in this one that we've only addressed lightly in here, and that's under 1.3 or line 92, and that's Eastern and Ellis. And it looks to me like it's assumed that they're going to go along with all this. That BNSF is going to deal with them directly and get a quick claim and all that kind of thing on their right of first refusal on this land. Have we been in contact with them? Are we pretty much assured that that's what's going to happen? And or if that land comes in at a real good price, that they won't come back and say, no, we decided we want to do that kind of thing.
No, they've certainly been a party to it. Ellison Eastern and the Burlington Northern, they're going to write their own separate MOU because they want to make sure that they have a guidance document out there if this truly goes forward, that both sides have agreed to the terms and conditions. And so they're working on that. They're also updating. They currently have an operating agreement for Ellison Eastern to run on their tracks, and they're updating that as well. And so Ellison Eastern and Burlington Northern have been working together, but they have to provide documentation before the PSA is executed. So to me, I think that's the real way to make sure that they're involved.
We have to make sure that they're not the wrench that clogs everything. I don't think they will be, knowing the people involved, but we got to make sure that that doesn't happen, obviously.
Yeah, we will.
Councilor Karski.
Thank you. Mark, I'm just kind of where Councilor Jameson is, and I'm looking at the purchase price. And it looks like we're going to have basically two methods to determine the value of this property. One is Burlington, according to line 82. Burlington Northern Santa Fe will provide a description of the city outlining the basis of the calculation, how they determine the value of the property. That's the one way. And then the city requires the Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970s, basically an appraisal. So we're going to have two values to begin with, and Burlington Northern comes and says it's worth $35 million, but this appraisal says it's worth, take a shot, $25 million. Based on this memorandum of understanding, because the $35 million isn't exceeded, but we only feel the value is $25 million, are we still obligated to pursue the purchase?
No. And this is somewhat in two parts because there is land, but there's also an operating asset. And Burlington Northern has said that they'll look regionally and find out what adjustments they need to make to their system regionally. One is to change the connection on how E&E comes into the yard. They have to move it from the southeast to the southwest to the southeast. That's a cost, have to build the interchange that's out by Timberline and Rice Street. But then in addition to that, they know that today they operate down there, and they are going through a methodology on what it will take to still operate out of the depot, but have crews running back and forth. So that's really the basis of that calculation. That's what this expert appraiser will do, is that they'll review what the land value is, but then they'll also sit down and they'll interview Burlington Northern to best understand that whole operating piece, and it still has to meet this Uniform Relocation Act, because that's the guidance process on how you use federal funds to acquire property.
Okay.
And so it's both those methods will be included.
So the price then will include the increased operating costs to Burlington Northern Santa Fe?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Say, Mark, I do have a question, if I might. So the bottom line is, this is just a memorandum of understanding. This is the items that you're negotiating under. You both have agreed to this in principle, but it isn't committing the city to anything. At the point in time you reach an agreement, if you do move forward with a purchase order on this, at that point in time, it's my understanding that will be presented to the city council for further discussion
And approval.
before
Correct.
anything is done at all.
That's correct.
But this is just the agreement that you both have reached to have an understanding about how you're going to proceed with the negotiations.
That's right. That's right.
Good. Any other questions? Good. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
I think everybody will have a chance to look at this a little bit more, and if you have any questions, please submit those to Mark. And if you feel we need to put this on the agenda next week too, Greg, we can surely deal with it at input at the council open discussion time again. Thank you. Okay. Anything else for open discussion? Nothing else, and I think we'll move into the presentations, and we have a overview of the Sioux Falls EMS system, and I'll turn it over to Fire Chief Jim Sedaris.
Hello, Council. My name is Jim Sedaris, Fire Chief of Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, and we're going to talk a little bit this afternoon on how our EMS system works. And what I mean by EMS is our response to medical calls throughout the city. What we do in Sioux Falls, and it's rather unique, is that we have a system that's all the responding agencies work together to have a tiered system, which means we don't just decide willy-nilly who's going to go. It's actually well thought out, well planned, and we've also looked at the best practices to ensure that we have a seamlessly integrated system of response, meaning that from when the call comes in to the first responders, police department, to the fire department, to the ambulance service, ultimately to the hospitals, it all works together as one big system. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to have myself. We're also going to have Darren Ketchum, who oversees Metro 911 Dispatch Center. We're going to have Captain Skip Miller from the police department talk about their response. Then Division Chief Jeff Helm from the fire department, and then Operations Manager Tim Rave, who oversees Rural Metro Ambulance Service, and then even Dr. Strand, who's a trauma surgeon with Avera, to talk about how this all works together. The one nice thing about Sioux Falls that's really unique is Sioux Falls is one of the only communities that I've been able to find that all of the major players, meaning the fire department, Metro 911, and the ambulance service are all nationally accredited. When I say nationally accredited, that means that each of these agencies has third-party validation to show that they meet the highest standards out there, following best practices, and being that we're all together accredited, we actually talk at regular meetings on how we can best provide the citizens of Sioux Falls the highest level of emergency care. And that emergency care can be anywhere from the whole spectrum of childbirth, trauma, psychiatric patients, and cardiac arrest patients. Sioux Falls does have one of the highest saves for cardiac arrest patients in the country, and part of that is due to a large part, I think, of the system working together. So each member is going to speak to their respective areas, and we'll have slides that we'll walk through. For some reason, we have a little bit of green on the screen. I don't know if you see that too or not, but looks like a technical difficulty, and I'm not going to touch the screen. First will be Darren Ketchum. Darren oversees the 911 Metro Dispatch Center.
Good afternoon, Council. Darren Ketchum, Metro Communications. I'll just give you a brief overview of what we do at the agency. When you look at these numbers, this does include the entire Minnehaha County area. Just understand the majority of these calls are in the Sioux Falls jurisdiction. So out of the 175,000 calls for service that we do every year, 12,000 of those are medical calls. And through our processes, we have a full-time staff member that goes through and does quality assurance. And we review approximately 2,000 of these calls every year to make sure that the national standards are being applied here and the local standards that we've identified are being applied appropriately. The accrediting entity that we work with is the National Academy of Emergency Medical Dispatch. We've been accredited since 2001, I want to say. I almost forget now, but we were the first in South Dakota, the 45th in the world. And the unique situation we have is in the accredited centers, there's only 118 of these. So if you look at the United States and there's approximately 6,000 PSAPs, only 118 of those meet the standards set forth by the National Academy. Why do we use this? This provides a standardized line of questioning. If you can imagine the types of callers that we get, oftentimes hysterical, maybe confused, maybe themselves injured, trying to provide information. We try to, by standardizing this and having a system that you're reading a script almost, it reduces the amount of freelance questions that could impede the quality of service provided. As you can imagine, emotions also enter the individual taking the call. Other things that this does, we provide immediate life-saving measures to the caller. We can teach you how to give CPR over the phone, placing pressure on a wound, assisting with childbirth. Those are all things that we utilize this system to do. Additionally, working with our partners, we use this system to determine the appropriate type and level of response. Type meaning ambulance, fire truck, policeman. Level meaning, is this a non-emergent situation or is this an emergent situation? The system that we use is a national framework. However, there is a level of customization that you're allowed, provided you have the proper input, and we do. We have an emergency doctor that's part of our system. We have the fire department, we have the police department, and we have the ambulance providers. So we can localize some of our call-taking standards. Additionally, as you'll hear the fire department and the police department talk about the safety of first responders. Certainly driving, we call it a code, but driving code, red lights and siren to a call places first responders and the public in some higher level of risk. So we try to minimize those instances to improve first responder safety and public safety. So here you see the numbers that we have locally. We exceed the national averages and the national standards in every category. Now, one thing that's interesting, you talk about the types of incidents we have here in Sioux Falls, and you try to think what is the most frequent number of calls we have. Well, out of those 12,000 approximate calls that we receive for medical calls, this is the breakdown in percentage of the types of calls. And I just did the top 10. There's 36 different cards that we use, but after the 10th one, the numbers get pretty small. I talked about the types of response. You'll hear people talk about code 1, 2, 3, and 4. Code 1 means non-emergent. That means typically that your first responders are traveling with the speed of traffic. They're stopping at all the stop signs, stopping at all the red lights. They're not utilizing any traffic manipulation devices to maneuver through the city. The rest are emergent responses that are determined based on the answers provided by the reporting party. Here you can see of the calls that we've reviewed year to date, we have this is a determinant drift. So obviously we want to be in the green in each one of these categories. You can see that out of the 1,628 that were reviewed so far, 1,610 were ideal. On 8 of the calls, an under response was sent, which causes risk to the public. On 9 of the calls, there was waste, which means it was oversent, and that can cause risk to public safety. Now here's what it looks like for us. I just wanted to give you a quick screenshot. These are the questions that are asked by the dispatcher when they're talking to you, and based on the answers that are provided, the system determines the type and level of response that you'll receive. Simultaneous to these questions being asked, there's another dispatcher that's talking with the fire department, talking with the ambulance, talking with the police, giving them patient updates, addresses, and just a general description of the incident that's going on. Yep, oh, that's fine. You can go to the next. So that's kind of in a snapshot what we do. There's 7 to 9 dispatchers working at any given point throughout the day. So even though you may be talking to somebody and you're waiting for help to get there, just rest assured that they do have a partner that's working with them, and they work together. So one person gathers the information, and simultaneously the information is provided to the responders. Next, I'll be followed by Captain Skip Miller with the police department.
Well, we play a small role, but a very important role in this process for the emergency response. And I'm just going to kind of go over what our role is and so forth with this. You can back up one slide, Jim. We respond to the Code 4 medical emergencies. We respond with rural metro and also with Sioux Falls Fire and Rescue. And those are ones that are life or death situations that require a quick response. Obviously, the response time is very important to us and others due to the nature of these types of emergencies. We try to dispatch the nearest available unit, and they utilize emergency lights and sirens when necessary to get there as quickly as possible. As was mentioned before, there's an inherent danger when we're running lights and sirens, so we do try to avoid that if possible and only do it when absolutely necessary. We do give our officers some discretion as to when they can run lights and sirens. They may not do it on all of these emergencies. Some of the examples may be the distance. For instance, if there was an emergency at the Empire Mall and our closest unit was downtown, we wouldn't necessarily want that unit to run lights and sirens all the way from downtown to the Empire Mall, because Fire Rescue or Sioux Falls Ambulance is obviously probably going to get there before us, and they, the level of attention that we will add to that scene doesn't necessitate us getting there that quickly. Another factor that could fall into that is if we were running on our way to a scene with emergency lights and sirens in Sioux Falls Fire, or the ambulance service gets there before us, we typically will shut down and then just drive at normal speeds the rest of the way, because obviously we aren't going to add anything once we get there. We've got another slide I'll talk about at the end here a little bit about the dangers towards officers in regards to running lights and sirens. Once we're there, we provide basic first aid and CPR. We're there obviously to preserve human life. The consideration of whether it's a crime scene or whether there's been any criminal activity is secondary. Once medical responders arrive, fire and ambulance, we turn the care of the victim over to them. We essentially at that point in time assist them in anything they need. Equipment, helping load equipment or getting equipment in the scene, or help with the victim, or keeping bystanders away so that they can do their jobs. We also do, after the medical emergency has been turned over to fire and ambulance, we do start looking to see if there's anything of a criminal nature that's going on at the scene. Thanks. One of the other things we look at is we do investigate some accidents within the city. Those would include firearms accidents or home accidents, occupational accidents, and public accidents that have serious bodily injury. Obviously, these start out usually as medical emergency. In all those cases, the officer's main responsibility is to determine that the incident is an accident and is not the result of a criminal or intentional act. And I talked about the dangers of running Code 3. We'll go to that last slide. A little known fact, these are the 2012 line of duty deaths for police officers. This is as of December 19th, and I've got some updated numbers on this for the finals for the year. But on this one here, you can see the total, we had 120 officers die in the line of duty last year, as of December 19th. It actually ended up at 126. Gunfire was 45. The final number on that was 47, and auto accidents ended up being 52. They're far more likely to have an officer die in the line of duty due to an auto accident than they are due to a gunfire incident. It's just as dangerous when they are answering a gun call, running code 3 lights and sirens on their way to that call as it is when they finally get there. So that's why we take that very serious. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'll turn it over to Jeff Helm with Sioux Falls Fire and Rescue.
Good afternoon. Jeff Helm, Division Chief, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. I'm just going to do a brief overview of what our role is in the community's tiered EMS response. Like I said, we're basic life support services, and what that means, we'll also assist the ALS, which is Rural Metro, which you'll hear about here shortly. In the tiered system, we have the EMD, which Darren talked about, 911 dispatch. They provide some life-saving information over the phone. Then we have the first responders, which Skip spoke about, PD. And then there's the basic life support service, and that's where the fire comes involved. We are all required to be EMT basic level skilled and trained. And currently we're at about 190 South Dakota registered EMTs. So we have quite a number of those, and they all have to, for operational level, be EMT trained. Like was discussed, we respond to all code 3 and 4 medical emergencies. And what that means, we're there to basically stabilize life-threatening events. That could be a trauma, which could be anything from a significant fall to a stabbing to a shooting, anything along that line. And we're looking at the big ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. So that's their big key we're trying to keep control of. And that goes along with sickness also. When I say sickness, it could be a flu that somebody's having trouble breathing, or a life-ending event where they're at cancer or something like that. We're going to be there if there's some event going on that needs assistance to keep them surviving. And when I say medical conditions, I'm referring to such things as a heart attack or a stroke. And in those events, we're going to likely use CPR, an AED defibrillator, and we're also going to possibly monitor those people on those events. And then we go to the next. And as far as accreditation goes, as the chief had spoke, when it means for EMS, it's very important as a benchmark for survivability. We use that. And when you look at the number, 90% of our code 3 calls we have to respond to and get on scene in travel time in less than 5 minutes and 12 seconds. That's important because obviously survivability increases the earlier you get an intervention in a life-threatening event. So that's where that accreditation comes in very valuable, and that's how we kind of figure out where we're going to have stations and different things like that in the long-term plans. And I kind of want to end it with a new intervention that's going to be occurring in January 8th. We're bringing to Sioux Falls a way to engage citizens, everyday citizens, to help us with this early intervention. And that's a smartphone app called Pulse Point. And what it does, it'll engage the everyday citizens that are willing and able to help with CPR events at public locations. It'll give them the same alert that it gives our EMS response when we get dispatched. So that our goal is to increase that survivability. The chief talked about how well we do with our CPR and our survivability when it comes to cardiac events. This is another step to help with that. So that we're kind of adding that to that tiered response system to engage our everyday citizens to help us in those outcomes, those big outcomes, so they can provide CPR and defibrillation if they so are trained to do so and in the right location at the right time. So there'll be further information on that when we roll out January 8th. That's kind of a real brief overview of what we do. In essence, it's exactly what it says. We're basic life support. We get on scene and we look for those things that we can do, the basic skill set that we need to do in intervention to help them until ALS, which is Rural Metro, which will be here next to speak about it, and then ultimately transport to a definitive care site, which is our hospitals. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Tim Rave with Rural Metro.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Jeff said, my name is Tim Rave. I'm the operations manager at Rural Metro Ambulance here in Sioux Falls. I've been a paramedic here for about 20 years, over 20 years this year. As you can see on the slide, we do serve the areas of Sioux Falls as our primary response area, and we also go out to Crooks, Renner, Harrisburg, and T. And so we receive our calls not only from Darren and his group at Metro Communications, but we also receive them from Lincoln County Dispatch, which is called 441. And we also receive them from private individuals, most often nursing homes. Good Samaritan Center may call up and say, you know, have an individual here that needs to be transported to the hospital. We would respond there and to make sure that there's the same level of dispatch for all of those calls, they are also all funneled through an EMD center, either our own certified center down in Omaha or through Metro Communications here in Sioux Falls to maintain that level of dispatch throughout the entire system. So every call gets the same level of dispatch regardless if it comes to a private number or to 911. This year, we're going to be just short of 14,000 calls. I haven't got the total numbers yet because, as I just described, some of those calls come from a private number. And so I can tell you how many 911 calls we had, but not private ones until I sit down and tally it all up. Our role is to respond to every request for service within the City of Sioux Falls and the surrounding area. As you already know, we are the only provider for calls that begin and end in the city limits. And that's important to note because there are other services that come into the community and transport patients out. So in other words, you have a family member at one of the 2 or 3 facilities here in the community and they want to go to the Mayo Clinic, someone else can come in and transport them out. We run 9 fully equipped advanced life support ambulances, and as the chief had described earlier, we are nationally accredited. I think they're just short of 130 nationally accredited agencies at this point out of the many thousands in the United States, so we're very proud of that. Go ahead, Jim. I thought it was important to, maybe before I go into quality assurance, I'll talk just a little bit about the system. Average call of the 13,000 or so calls we get through Metro Communications. The average citizen, calls 911. It's answered at the dispatch center. They triage the call and then dispatch us over the radio. So all communications that we have are over a radio and an alphanumeric pager that we all carry on our hip. And so we also have the address and the response and an alphanumeric pager along with hearing it audibly. And then we communicate with Metro Communications through the radio system. One thing that we're very proud of in this system is quality assurance, and both Jeff and Darren already described the quality assurance that we do. We do it both internally in all of our organizations. We do it externally as a group. Monthly or quarterly we meet and go over calls from beginning to end as a group. So very much like the way we set it up today. We'll take a call. Darren's group will describe the receiving the call, the dispatch. Then law enforcement will talk about their role on the call, then fire, then ambulance. And then we also have the hospital folks there, and they talk about the outcome of that call with the patient. So we're very proud of the system that we have to make sure we're providing quality care to all the citizens of our community. Our medical director is a board-certified emergency department physician here in Sioux Falls, who practices full-time at one of the local hospitals. We're mandated to, from our licensure, to have 72 hours of recertification every year. So I just wanted to put that in there, that know that we have to continue to do that on an ongoing basis. And again, our quality assurance program ensures the best possible care for all the patients in the community. Jim. Something unique about our system, and especially the ambulance service, we are probably one of the most scrutinized agencies in the community. We have an oversight board called REMSA, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the Regional EMS Authority. In conjunction with that is the REMSA Medical Board, and that's a group of local physicians that we meet with monthly and go over new and innovative ways to help take care of the sick and injured in our community. So we're staying up on all the latest practices. Beyond that, in our contract with the city, we have response time requirements, and that's monitored monthly. We also, I forgot what I was going to talk about there. The quality assurance on the back end, I guess I jumped down to the bottom of the slide. All the patients we transport obviously go to a hospital. We are not allowed to take patients to clinics, so I couldn't come and pick you up and take you to, your clinic. We have to end at an emergency room, in one of the emergency rooms in the community. Those folks all have a working relationship with the EMS authority, so if there are issues with the patient care, it is also funneled back through the system that way. So we couldn't just say, oh gosh, yeah, we do great, and and no one's overseeing it, anything that occurs can also be found out on the backside from the emergency department end. So it's really a great checks and balance, I think, from the system. It holds us to a high standard, and that feedback loop is there to make sure that we are providing the care that we say we're providing to the citizens. Maybe I'm done. I guess that's the end of mine. I'll certainly stand by for questions after we're done, and I'll turn it over to Dr. David Strand, a trauma surgeon at one of our hospitals here in the community.
Good afternoon. I'm David Strand, one of the surgeons in town. My group does trauma over at Avera McKinnon. First, I'd like to commend each of these individuals and their staff for their excellent pre-hospital care, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be at this point in this excellent facility and system that we have right now. From the hospital setting, we're the definitive care facility, so we're going to get all the patients that come in. So it's very critical that those patients' initial care gets done immediately and appropriately, and that all of that data is conveyed to our hospital systems in an appropriate amount of time. So what we're doing is we're gathering the information. We're helping with medical type management, management of difficult cases as that patient is being transferred from their home or the scene of an accident to the hospital. So it's very important that we get accurate information. Once we do that, it allows us then to get all of our people involved, all of our assets that are going to be appropriate for taking care of those patients, and get those lined up appropriately. So then we receive the patient, and then we do the definitive care. Now, all those patients are reviewed, and all that feedback is then taken back to all the appropriate pre-hospital individuals and staff members. So there's a continual quality involvement here, both mortality, morbidity. We look at outcomes, all of that data, so that we can improve our system, because it's not a stagnant system. It's always improving. It's always changing. So it's very important to continue with this data, and that all of these institutions are very open and willing to all the criticisms that are made, both good and bad. And I'm not going to bore you with much more. Any questions?
Well, that's all we have, but if you have any questions of any of the providers, you can ask away and we can get you the answers or get back to you with the answers.
Questions? Kermit, please.
Excuse me for a moment.
Sure.
I just want to ask one quick question about the house fire on the north side where we have 3 children dying. And reading an account of that, it talked about it was so hot that the firefighters could not get in there. And I was just wondering, do we have any special equipment like they do at the airport where they have those suits and they just go right into it?
Right. The proximity suits that you're talking about allows firefighters to get closer to the heat and flames, and part of that's due to the JP4 jet fuel. But for firefighting, it really doesn't work, and those temperatures can be so extreme that you wouldn't last very long in those. And those suits aren't really designed for structural firefighting. Going into a structure, they're more designed for out in the open with aircraft. So unfortunately, we don't have anything like that yet.
Is there anything on the market?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Also, I have one question for Tim. Please. Yeah, Tim, I was wondering, how's the upgrading of the equipment at Rural Metro going?
Actually, pretty well. Thank you for the question. We just received a brand new ambulance within the last week. I can't remember the day. I took a little vacation, but just within the last 7 days, received a truck. And so, we upgraded in this last year to LifePak 15s, which are really kind of the cutting edge, and I won't bore you with the details, but of monitored defibrillator on the market right now, and it does some really awesome patient monitoring that I, again, won't bore you with all the details, but yeah, actually going pretty well right now. So.
You have made a commitment, I believe, to this city to replace operating ambulances. Is that not correct, from a rotation basis? Could you explain that to us, please?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. We have an agreement with the city to replace one new unit every year. So obviously the oldest unit or highest mileage, really not determined, but that unit would fade off and a new unit would come in. So,
great, good, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councilor Anderson, please.
Chief Sedaris to start. Thank you, Chief. You stated that EMT is a basic level requirement for every fireman that we have on the force. Is that correct?
Firefighter. Yes.
Firefighter? Okay, excuse me.
It's okay.
How many firefighters do we have at a higher level than EMT on the force?
There's probably in the mid-20s, 25 that are paramedics. We have a couple that are registered nurses.
Okay, and then you have a requirement of an ETA after a call of a right around about a little bit around 5 minutes?
5 minutes and 12 seconds is our 90 percentile.
Okay. And if I could have Mr. Rave, if I can continue the questioning.
Please,
Thank
Kenny.
you. Tim, you talked about response times for rural metro. What are the response times for rural metro?
Certainly, thank you for the question. I thought about it after I went by, and it didn't go into great detail. The city contract, the contract we have with the city mandates that we are at code 3, and for the group that's emergent, so lights and sirens to the call, in 8 minutes, 59 seconds or less, 90% of the time. And then in non-emergent situations, 19 minutes, 59 seconds, 20% of the time.
Okay. And then you stated that you have a board-certified
emergency department. Yeah.
As we know, Dr. Luther is still the medical director for REMSA, correct?
Correct.
Who is, if I can ask, who the medical director is for rural metro?
Certainly. It's Dr. Don Koziak. He's an emergency room physician at Tavera McKinnon.
Okay. Then I guess questions that I've had, and I've asked Chief Sedaris in the past, and I believe you and I also have had discussions about this, with the requirements that our firemen have as far as EMTs and paramedics. Have we looked at ways that we can get response to people quicker? I mean, if there's something that needs to be done, we found in some cases our fire personnel aren't allowed to do certain things until the ambulance gets there. Are we continually looking at ways to try to improve that time that we start really assisting the patient?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but after doing it for 20 years, I think really part of what it boils down to is there's only so many patients every day. And about 50% of those patients or less do not require a lot of the skills that you're talking about. And so for the group, that would be starting an IV, giving medications other than, baby aspirin or nitroglycerin. But I'm talking about pressor drugs where dopamine, get your blood pressure up, those that you don't use very often. And so like any skill, the less you use it, the less good you're going to be at it. And it's not the way I really wanted to say that, but, practice makes perfect. And certainly in those situations where you're talking about high stress, high pressure, family is obviously for good reason concerned, scared. They're all looking at you to make sure that you start that IV, get that advanced airway tube down, take control of that situation. I can tell you, I'm not the paramedic that I used to be, spending a lot of time in the office. I was a much better paramedic 10 years ago, I can tell you that. And so I can't imagine not doing it very often. And so I guess the short answer is by diluting that pool. I know there's been studies done. I'm not going to quote you any today. I certainly could get you some research if you want me to do that. I'd be happy to do that. That shows diluting those skills lowers proficiency. And so those times where you truly, truly need it, you may not be able to get it. And that's really been one of the concerns, and we've had this discussion for almost the entire time I've been here. I've been part of the quality assurance process for the last 15 years, and it's been one of the things that the chief and I have talked about when he wasn't the chief and I wasn't the operations manager, and we've talked about it for a long time. So yes, it's a concern. Yes, it's something we continue to think about and look at, but until there's a good way to make sure that everybody's doing it at a proficient level so that when the critical moment comes where you have to get it and you can't, that's really the drawback to it. It'd be great, yeah, if we could have one standing on every corner. I mean, ideally, that it's excessive, obviously, but that would be the ideal. But for many reasons, you can't do that, and so that's really the best answer I can come up with.
One more. Two more.
I got two questions, if possible. One for Mr. Ray.
Okay.
Also, you have an internal code, Code 5. How does that affect your response times?
Actually, it helps our response times because the way we staff, we have an extra unit of folks on call. Okay, so they can be in the city limits but not at a station. And so Code 5, we could call that anything, doesn't matter. It's just a name for saying that we need our extra critical need folks to come in to staff during peak demand times. And so if you didn't have those folks, obviously response times would be worse. So.
And then one for the emergency room doctor, our hospital doctor, if I could. I'm sorry I didn't write down your name, sir. That's all right. In your presentation, you discussed the communication, I believe, between the ambulance service and the emergency room as far as getting the information to your doctors. When does that process actually start? Does it start with the fireman, or does it start when the ambulance gets there?
Well, actually, it can start with both, but most of the time it's with the ambulance upon arrival. I don't personally do that. Like Dr. Koziak will do that. They're the emergency room physicians, but I'm actually a surgeon. But as soon as that, correct me if I'm wrong, as soon as the ambulance arrives, and if there's any questions from any of the other pre-hospital people, they can actually call in and ask for assistance. And that's what we're for, is also to help, dictate patient care, even though they're not at our facilities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilor Karski?
Not too sure if my question's for the chief or Mr. Rave. Just curious, I'm looking for an answer as to how do we determine how many people and how much equipment is needed by our emergency responders? Is there standards somewhere? Is it based on need locally? How does that work?
For fire, and this what we look as for people, is we know that initially it's going to take for cardiac arrest, which is one of our highest levels of calls. It's going to take about 4 people to run that call. And we've looked at this every which way for one for scene security. We're going to have one doing compressions, meaning actually pushing on the chest, one for airway maintenance, and then the third one's going to run the fourth one will be running the defibrillator, so we can get that early shock on board. As far as our equipment, we look at what are the types of calls we go on, and then we make sure that we have equipment to handle two of those calls at the same time, because sometimes we'll have 2 patients or we'll have an accident with multiple patients. If we do have a mass casualty or where we have multiple patients, we can call in more trucks. So that's how we do it. And then again, we look at the system once the medics show up, and there'll be 2 medics. They're usually starting IVs, starting advanced airways, and jump in, Tim, if I'm saying anything wrong. And then what we do is essentially augment whatever they need to be done. If it's a cardiac arrest, for instance, we're still going to be doing bagging the patient. We're still going to be doing compressions, the defib, but the medics are going to be now doing the advanced line of drugs and then the advanced airways, and then communicating back with the hospital. And I know on TV you see these people on scene for a long time. We're pretty much moving right along in the system, so get them in the ambulance and moving along to the hospital as quick as we can. Okay. Do you want to add anything, Tim?
Maybe I can clarify a little bit more. I appreciate that, Chief, but I'm talking maybe even bigger picture. How many ambulances do we have to have in town? How many people do you need? How is that formula based?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think let me jump off from where the chief is, and I may go back a little bit from there. I think, he really touched on Well, maybe I'll just go back to the beginning. Staffing a unit is, obviously, you got to have a minimum of 2 people. And so you have somebody to drive the truck and somebody to provide care. In our system, we trade calls. So both crew members are paramedics. They get experience running those calls then. And so we just alternate every other call. Most systems do something similar to that. Now in Kansas City, they run a EMT basic and a paramedic in the ambulance. Paramedic runs all the calls, and the basic drives. That's all they do. Help load the cot, put the patient in, clean up the truck afterwards. So 2 folks in an ambulance is really kind of the standard. I know there are some of my volunteer friends in this area, they run 3, 4, it depends on who shows up at the station to go on the call. But 2 in the ambulance is really standard for a high volume system. Units specifically. In a high volume system, you base that in our system and many systems on response time criteria. And so as long as you're able to maintain your response time criteria, you're probably running enough units. A couple of years ago, we added unit hours, which is an ambulance basically, for about 8 hours a day at that time. We've since expanded that to 10 hours a day, and we move that dependent upon the volume of the calls in that particular hour of the day. And so I can tell you, we monitor that monthly. I can tell you when most calls occur. It doesn't change dramatically, but really it makes sense. It starts coming up at 7 in the morning. It peaks for us about 3 to 4 in the afternoon, and then dies down by 10 p.m., midnight really, and then from 1 to 5 is really quiet, and then it just cycles like that. And, of course, there are peaks that, there are times at 4 in the morning you run 5 calls. But we do that once a year, not, daily. So that, based on how many calls per hour is how many units you put on. And we average that out over the course of the year, and that's why we have people on call, because we can flex to 5 or 6 units, but really we only probably run about 2.7, 2.8 calls an hour. So we can flex, but again, obviously we flex up to 4 or 5 sometimes, or like we had the bus accident on Friday, might have a call with 6 patients. But, thankfully we don't have bus accidents, but I don't remember the last time we had a bus accident. So that's a good thing, but that's why you have some units available to flex up when it gets busy. And then just to finish up with where the chief was going on the cardiac arrest, that's why we don't run 4 people in an ambulance, because we have the ability in this system to have folks ride along. And, if the situation even deems necessary, we'll have law enforcement ride along for someone that's belligerent or out of control, not necessarily medically induced. They would ride along to make sure that we're safe, the patient's safe, and, we get to the hospital and finish that in a reasonable fashion. But most of the time we take along 1 or 2 firefighters. We just did it on Friday, and we had a patient that was, because of his medical condition, was out of control and just needed some assistance to get things stabilized till we get some medicine in him and calmed him down, took him to the hospital. But.
Any other questions? Okay, Kenny, please.
Thank you for the presentation. Being someone that a few years ago had a friend, and I've said this to a lot of people, I watched a friend fall and have a massive coronary in a city park, and we started doing CPR on him, and it was a quite awakening situation. And seeing how well our emergency services work, I can say I'm 1 for 1 in doing CPR. Thank you.
Good. I'd like to thank you too. I think the team does a great job. Counselor Jamison and myself serve on Metro Communications, Metro Management, and I know we take these meetings very seriously. And the presentations and the information we get from Darren and his team is excellent. And I'd like to accommodate or thank all of you for all the hard work you do. Are there any other questions? That being said, we will adjourn. And just a quick reminder that immediately after this, we do have a fiscal committee meeting, and we need 5 minutes, and we will re-adjourn. Thank you.